It's a Tuesday morning. Your alarm goes off, you drag yourself out of bed, and before you've even had a proper thought, you're already mentally calculating how long you have before you need to leave the house. You throw on some clothes, grab your bag, and somewhere between the front door and your destination, you stop. Maybe it's the coffee shop on the corner. Maybe it's the breakfast spot that always smells incredible at 7 a.m. Maybe it's just a quick gas station run because, honestly, you need something to survive the morning. You hand over $5, maybe $6, feel a tiny bit better, and you move on with your day. And here's the thing. That moment feels completely fine. It feels like the one small reward you're allowed after a stressful week. You're not buying a car, you're not booking a vacation you can't afford, you're buying a coffee. And yet, if you're watching this video, there's probably a part of you that suspects something isn't quite adding up. You're working hard, you're not completely reckless with money, but somehow, at the end of every month, the account doesn't look the way you hoped it would. My name is Ben, and I spend way too much time thinking about the psychology of small spending decisions and why they matter so much more than we think. If you're someone who feels like they're doing okay financially, but can never quite seem to build real savings or get ahead, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps you out. Now, before you roll your eyes, I know, the stop buying coffee advice has been around forever and it's become almost a joke at this point. Financial influencers have been mocking it for years. People push back on it constantly, and honestly, some of that pushback is fair. But here's what most people don't realize. The argument was never actually about the coffee. The coffee is just the most visible symptom of a much deeper financial pattern, and that pattern is what's quietly working against you every single day. Let's start with some real numbers, because I want you to see this clearly. According to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average American household spends somewhere around $3,000 a year on food and beverages outside the home. That's not a number that includes groceries. That's eating out, coffee runs, quick snacks, the occasional vending machine, the fast food stop because you didn't meal prep. When you break that down, it's roughly $8 to $9 a day. And when you hear it like that, it sounds so small that your brain basically dismisses it immediately. That's the trap. Your brain is designed to evaluate individual transactions, not cumulative ones. When you spend $5 on a Tuesday morning, your brain processes that as a $5 decision. It doesn't naturally add it to Monday's $6 transaction or Wednesday's $4 one. And because each individual moment feels manageable and reasonable, the pattern never feels like a problem until you look at your account at the end of the month and genuinely can't explain where the money went. Let me walk you through the math here, because I think most people have a vague sense that small spending adds up, but they've never actually seen the number written out. So let's do it properly. If you spend $7 a day, and I'm being conservative, on miscellaneous small purchases, that's $49 a week. That's $196 a month. That's $2,352 a year, just on small, barely noticed daily spending. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Let's say instead of spending that $2,352, you invested it. Not in anything exotic, just a basic index fund that historically returns around 7 to 8% annually, which is a reasonable long-term average based on the S&P 500's historical performance. Over 10 years, that $2,352 per year doesn't just become $23,520. It becomes roughly $34,000 thanks to compound growth. Over 20 years, that number climbs to somewhere around $107,000. Over 30 years, we're talking over $237,000 from what started as a $7 daily habit. Now, you might be thinking, Ben, that assumes I invest every single dollar I save, which is not realistic. And you're right, I'm not saying perfection is the goal, but here's my point. Most people have never sat down and seen that number. They've never actually watched what $7 a day turns into over decades. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The number isn't the point, the awareness is. So if the math is this clear, why doesn't everyone just stop? Why do intelligent, hard-working people keep making the same small financial decisions over and over again, even when some part of them knows it's not helping? This is where the psychology gets really interesting, and I'd argue this part matters way more than any spreadsheet. There's something researchers call present bias, and it basically means that human brains are wired to value things that feel good right now much more than things that will feel good in the future. It's not a character flaw, it's not laziness, it is literally how your brain evolved. Because for most of human history, the future was uncertain, and the present is what kept you alive. The $5 coffee gives you something real and immediate, comfort, a moment of control, a brief sense of normalcy before a hard day. The $237,000 in 30 years is abstract, invisible, and emotionally meaningless to your brain right now. And it gets more complicated than that. A lot of small spending habits are actually coping mechanisms. Think about what triggers most of those $5 decisions. It's usually stress, boredom, a rough morning, a difficult week at work, pressure from family, feeling like you deserve something because everything else feels hard. When you're exhausted and overwhelmed, your brain reaches for the fastest available reward, and the fastest available reward is almost always something you can buy within 2 minutes. This is not a spending problem, it's a stress management problem wearing a spending problem costume. Here's something that almost nobody talks about when they discuss small daily spending. There's an identity component to it that runs deeper than most people realize. Over time, these small habits become part of how you see yourself and how you move through the world. The morning coffee isn't just a coffee, it's the version of yourself that has things together, that can afford small pleasures, that isn't scrimping and struggling. Giving it up doesn't just feel like saving money, it feels, emotionally, like losing something about who you are. This is why willpower alone almost never works long term. You can white-knuckle your way through a week of skipping the coffee shop, but if you haven't addressed the identity underneath the habit, you'll drift back to it because that behavior is connected to something much more personal than caffeine. The people who successfully shift their financial habits don't just cut spending, they build a new identity around something else. They start to see themselves as someone who builds wealth intentionally, and that identity becomes just as satisfying, eventually, as the old one. Now you might be thinking, that sounds great in theory, Ben, but how do I actually do that? And I hear you. So let's get practical, because I don't want to just diagnose the problem. I want to give you something useful to walk away with. The first thing, and I know this sounds boring, but stay with me, is to actually look at your last 30 days of bank and card statements. Not to judge yourself, not to feel guilty, just to see clearly. Most people have a rough mental estimate of what they spend, and that estimate is almost always lower than the real number. A study from Sloan Management Review found that people routinely underestimate their discretionary spending by 20 to 40%. Not because they're dishonest, but because the brain just doesn't track small recurring transactions the way it tracks big ones. When you do this audit, don't look at it as a list of mistakes. Look at it as data. You're a detective looking at evidence, not a judge looking at a defendant. What you're searching for are patterns, not the one-off expensive dinner, but the things that happen consistently, quietly, week after week. The daily stop, the subscription you forgot about, the convenience purchase that appears 3 times a week. These are the things that compound invisibly, and seeing them clearly is the first real step. What most people find when they do this honestly is surprising, not because they're spending on wild things, but because they're spending the most money on the things they thought about the least. The intentional purchases, the things you actually planned and chose, those are rarely the problem. It's the automatic, habitual, low-thought transactions that quietly drain the account. And that distinction matters because it means the fix isn't about deprivation, it's about intention. Here's what most people get wrong when they try to stop a spending habit. They try to just stop it cold, with nothing to replace it. And that almost never works because the habit existed for a reason. It was meeting some need, comfort, stimulation, a sense of control, a social ritual. If you remove the behavior without addressing the need doesn't disappear. It just finds another outlet, and that outlet might actually be more expensive. The smarter move is substitution, not elimination. Let's say your $6 morning coffee run is really about having a moment to yourself before the chaos of the day begins. The coffee is the vehicle, the moment is the actual need. So what if you kept the moment but changed the vehicle?
Make something at home. Sit with it for 5 minutes before you leave and protect that ritual. The habit stays. The drain on your account doesn't. This sounds almost too simple, but the reason it works is that you're not fighting your brain, you're redirecting it. The same logic applies to lunch runs, spontaneous online shopping, the late-night delivery order. In most cases, if you trace the behavior back far enough, it's responding to something. Hunger you didn't prepare for, loneliness, the need for a dopamine hit after a frustrating hour at work. When you identify the actual need, you give yourself the chance to meet it without it costing you $15 every time. And that is where real financial momentum starts, not in dramatic gestures, but in small, consistent redirections. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, and this is the part that I think has the highest actual impact for most people. Because even if you audit your spending, even if you substitute smarter habits, the truth is that willpower is unreliable. Life gets hard, weeks get stressful, old patterns creep back. So the move that actually works long-term is removing willpower from the equation entirely. And what I mean by that is automation. If you're waiting to save whatever's left at the end of the month, you are playing a losing game, and it's not your fault. It's just how that system works. When money sits in a checking account, it gets spent. Not always on anything dramatic, just gradually on the 1,000 small things that life presents to you every day. But if you set up an automatic transfer on the day you get paid, even $50, even $75, to a separate account that you don't look at daily, something shifts. The money is gone before your brain registers it as available, and you adjust, not because you're disciplined, but because you don't have a choice. This is called paying yourself first, and it's one of the oldest ideas in personal finance, but it's old because it works. According to research from the National Bureau of Economic Research, people who automate their savings consistently save significantly more than people who save manually, even when their income is identical. The behavior isn't the difference, the system is. And building the right system is something you can do this week, today even, in about 10 minutes. Look, I want to zoom out for a second because I think there's something important that gets missed in every single conversation about small spending habits. The $5 isn't just about the $5. It's a signal. It's a symptom of something much bigger, which is the relationship you have with money on a day-to-day basis. Because the people who consistently build wealth over time, and I'm not talking about lottery winners or trust fund kids, I'm talking about regular working people who quietly accumulate real financial security. They don't have dramatically higher incomes than everyone else. They have a fundamentally different relationship to the daily decisions that most people never examine. They've done the uncomfortable work of actually looking at their habits, their patterns, and their triggers. They've accepted that no amount of income growth solves a spending awareness problem, because study after study on lottery winners and sudden income increases shows that when people get more money without changing their relationship to it, they mostly just scale up the same habits. More income, same percentage saved, same financial stress, just with more zeros attached. The number in your account grows, and somehow the account still feels empty at the end of the month.
This is why financial literacy isn't just about knowing where to invest or which account to open. It's about the boring, daily, invisible stuff. It's about what happens in those small moments between your front door and wherever you're going. That's where most financial futures are actually being decided. Not in the big, dramatic moments, but in the Tuesday morning stops that nobody thinks twice about. So let me bring this home, because I want to leave you with something concrete. There are 3 shifts that I think genuinely move the needle for people who are trying to improve their financial situation. Not tips, not hacks, actual shifts in how you approach this. The first shift is from vague intention to specific numbers. I want to save more is not a plan. I'm going to transfer $200 every payday to a separate high-yield savings account is a plan. Vague goals produce vague results. The moment you attach a specific number and a specific action to your intention, your brain has something real to work with. The second shift is from monthly thinking to daily awareness. Most people think about their finances once a month, usually when a bill arrives or when the account dips lower than expected. But your financial life is built out of daily decisions, and if you only check in monthly, you're flying blind most of the time. Even spending 5 minutes once a week just glancing at your transactions keeps you connected to where the money is actually going. That awareness alone changes behavior, not because you're policing yourself, but because you can't unsee information once you have it. The third shift, and this is the one that I think matters most, is from shame to curiosity. Most people avoid looking at their spending because it feels bad. They already have a vague sense that something's off, and examining it more closely feels like confirming their worst fears about themselves. But shame closes the loop. It makes you feel stuck and makes you less likely to change, not more. Curiosity opens the loop. When you approach your own financial patterns with genuine interest, like, why do I always spend more on Thursdays? What's happening on those days? You start to actually understand yourself. And understanding yourself is the prerequisite for changing anything. Look, I'm not here to tell you that $5 is going to make or break your financial future on its own. That's not the honest story. The honest story is that $5 is a symbol. It represents every small decision that happens automatically, without thought, every single day. And the accumulation of those decisions over months and years is what your financial life is actually made of. The people who get ahead financially aren't the ones who never buy coffee. They're the ones who've decided at some point to stop letting their spending happen to them and start making it something they actually choose. That's a quiet shift. It doesn't look dramatic from the outside, but over 10, 20, 30 years, the distance between those two approaches is enormous, and that distance is entirely available to you. If this gave you something to think about, drop a comment below. I genuinely read them, and I'd love to know which part hit home for you. And if you know someone who's been feeling stuck with their finances, share this with them. Not to call them out, just because sometimes the right framing at the right moment is the thing that finally makes something click. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.